All right, welcome back to The Buck Starts Here, the podcast that digs deep into the juicy stories, power plays, and wild twists that shape the presidencies of the United States. I'm Kyle, the Monroe Doctrine to Eric Mason's Manifest Destiny. Last week we covered Monroe's actual presidency, so today is the day we get to focus on the ancillary characters and events of his term in office. This is my favorite part because we get to shine a spotlight on a lot more of the lesser-known figures and events from his times. There should also be no mention of Desiree this week, so there should be some more variety in this week's game of Spot the Mispronounced Word, although you can make a case that emphasizing deserves a spot on there for last week.
Does that count if I use the wrong word instead of mispronouncing it? Because there's a lot of French in last week's episode.
Yeah, I think nobody knows how to pronounce those French words, so I think you're fine on those ones, but I think you mispronounced the word that you were trying to pronounce, which wasn't emphasizing, so I think that counts.
No, I think that counts. That was actually a really good rationale for it. I accept it.
What are you going to mispronounce today?
Oh, so many. There's a lot of Latin American countries in this week's episode.
Oh, yeah, Monroe Doctrine, huh? No.
Yeah, it's going to be started. Also, Arkansas should be called Arkansas.
Yeah, why is it not?
The Native American tribe that derives the word Kansas from. There's two different tribes. One pronounces it Kansas, and one pronounces it more like Kansas in the word Arkansas. I'll look this up one time.
Kansas.
Yeah. Huh. Were you expecting me to have an answer for that one? I don't think you were.
Okay, different stressor. I see. I was trying to sound it out in my head. It didn't quite make sense. There's another weird one that's like right next to Louisiana, like the border between Louisiana and Texas. It's got like a kind of weird shared name, isn't there? Like Texarkana. Texarkana.
Yeah, Texarkana is not. I thought it was like Texas, Arkansas.
Yeah, it's Texarkana. That's what it's called.
Texas should be like 4 states. I'm gonna take heat for that, but it's so big.
Texas should be 4 states. California should be like 7.
Talking about random things I learned recently, I did not realize Article 5 of NATO does not apply to Hawaii.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think that's fair. It's insane.
Well, because it's in the Pacific, huh?
Yeah, but does it apply to? I never heard it didn't apply to Alaska.
Alaska is at least on the continental U.S. kind of.
Yeah, I think it's more
on the
because
continent. I think is more what it is.
I just think it's because like Russia, it's probably would be easier for Russia to attack.
That's a good point.
And they're like, oh, they're not going down to Hawaii. Didn't think we were going to start this episode off with Article 5, but that's the variety we bring you. And if we want to loop this in, America's first foray into international treaties, international diplomacy, as being a world leader, starts under Monroe, and that's a transition.
Boom. Let's do it.
Boom. Let's go.
Banter complete.
Okay, good. Well, everybody have a good day. We'll talk to you soon. All right, so last week we left off setting the stage. He's elected. He's getting ready to start, forms his super team. We know who he is as a character. We know who he is as a person. All the great stuff him and Beth have done. I don't
have we figured out his pet yet?
Ooh, let's see if I have
the White House pet.
Who is in the? Gonna bring up my pet page.
I think that's awesome that you have a page of White House pets.
Oh, he had the boring one. He just had a Cocker Spaniel. Yeah, that one's boring.
Wait, can you say that again? He had a what?
A Cocker Spaniel? What do you say it?
A Cocker Spaniel?
Yeah, but I'm saying I don't pronounce my R's.
It said Cocky Spaniel?
No, Cocker Spaniel.
Cocker Spaniel. Okay.
Yeah,
like poop.
My grandmother had one. Cam. Yeah. What do you think? It was a really full of himself spaniel.
All right. Yeah, exactly.
Also, for some reason, when I was looking this up, everybody keeps telling there's like all these stupid like online like random facts about the presidents who claim that he had a Siberian Husky named Sebastian, but there's literally no evidence of that.
What's their source?
They don't ever give a source. Like, and I had hold on. I'm gonna let me get something up right here. So I have a little page I do on, as you know, I have a little page I do on all the presidents, and he would never name anything Sebastian. That's my my anger to this.
He was not a fan of Little Mermaid, you're saying?
No, I was like Saint Sebastian was what I was thinking of, but yeah, I guess not. Okay. It's just not like the linguistic. Like he would have a French or a British name, not a. I think Sebastian actually like
Did I see that the Marquise de Lafayette actually sent them a bunch of sheepdogs too?
Yes, they did have one, but I believe they were sent after his presidency.
That's still really cool though.
Yeah. Yeah, it's 18. I set my little link on it. Yeah, in 1826, Monroe wrote to Lafayette asking if he would send him a dog to attend to his sheep. So he sent him a sheepdog.
Oh, that's awesome.
I just love the idea that James Monroe is like writing one of the greatest like philosophers and Frenchmen of his time. Like, yo man, can I get a sheepdog? And the dude was like, absolutely. Yeah. Sebastian comes from Greece. From Greek. That's its linguistic root.
Where are we going with this one?
Oh, I have no idea. I just don't like that people
detour us into the pets, but
no, I just don't like when people just like make something up like that. Maybe he did have a Siberian. Also, like Siberian Huskies, like I don't think were that popular at the time, and I don't know where he's getting one.
it sounds like the deep state of Siberian Husky manufacturing.
I think it's Cyclops by the Siberian Husky, big Siberian Husky.
Big Siberian Husky, yeah. Exposés, that's what you get on this show.
Like, they weren't even called Siberian Huskies back then. They were called, there was like some word I can't pronounce, I'm not going to pronounce that name, but it's like the Hukchi people of Russia. Yeah, like the idea, like most dogs weren't around before like 1890. Most breeds of dogs, it was like they a lot of them formed after that. After selective breeding came in there. So yeah, just yell at the people who say he had a Siberian Husky.
Yeah,
like, that is we know so much about presidential pets, and there's no documentation on this guy yet. If you try and look up presidential pets, it like pops up like 800 times. I'm like, source. So Monroe.
yes. He's on track here.
So Monroe, his stuff was very outward looking, and we're going to do a whole episode on the Monroe Doctrine because it's the most important thing ever accomplished under his presidency, and that's saying a lot because his presidency was actually very forward looking. His presidency we focus. I think in school you get taught the Monroe Doctrine, you get taught the era of good failing, end of the war of 1812, Monroe Doctrine. All right, let's get on to Jackson.
I don't think I ever heard of the era of good feeling until I met you. Actually, I don't think they taught it
Really?
that way in my school. No.
Interesting.
Or I maybe skipped that day.
Yeah, we hyper focus on it around here because of like you can go see like Bunker Hill, like you can see revolutionary stuff. So
I'm sure if I lived in a city where the president who wrote the document was born in, they probably would have spent a little more time covering the ancillary stuff around it.
It would be wild if they just glossed over it. That'd be pretty funny. Like, wait, is that guy? The guy's buried right there. He's on the same road. Like I went to high school on the same road that dude's buried. Yeah, it's just really cool. So he starts off, 1870 comes along, gets elected, right? We'll lead off where we let off last time, right? He's coming in, he does his national goodwill tour in 1817. Woo, we're off to it. But beneath all that, there was sectional divisions. Right now, you're starting to see North and South divides. It's not just on slavery; it's on economic issues mostly. Mm-hmm. And there becomes this dialogue of where does federal power exist? Now, you got to imagine this is the last founding father to become president. Some argue that JQA is the last founding father. I don't know. Like,
I think you can make a good argument.
Yeah, because people say James. Oh, well, nobody argues James Monroe was. James Monroe was 17 when the American Revolution started. John Quincy Adams was 12, 13 years old when he's doing translating service for a Russian diplomat. So maybe you could say John Quincy Adams is a founding son. Maybe you could say that he's a founding son. That's probably the argument I would make.
I would rather just call John Adams the founding grandfather.
Ooh, that's dope. And it would work nice because he also wrote the Massachusetts Constitution, which was the basis for that. I prefer that one. I'm team that. Ooh, does that make Benjamin Franklin a founding grandfather too?
Yeah,
who's
why
older?
not?
Yeah, why not? Let's open the envelope. So he gets in there, and you see so you have Washington, you have Adams, Jefferson, Madison, right? Like, in this whole dialogue that is occurring is federal power. Now, you have the Federalists, the first two presidents, arguing for this strong central government. You have George Washington putting down rebellions. But in reality, if we want to take a step back here, again, history's not flat. Washington could do whatever he wanted.
Yeah.
All right. He was the federal government. Adams was a one-termer. He was the first one-termer until his son was also a one-termer. That was your last taste of the last taste of federalism and power was last century to a lot of people walking around. And then you had the Democratic Republican, and they focus more decentralized. Again, Federalists aren't Republicans, Democratic Republicans aren't Democrats. That's a very, very simplistic argument that I've read 1,000 times, and they have nothing to do with each other. They're half of both. All right, so these aren't modern platforms.
You can't have modern platforms in the past. Like, there's just no translation between the two.
No, absolutely, you're 100% right. So, but now we start to see a split within the Democratic Republican Party that would eventually turn into the first Democratic president, Jackson. But we're starting to see this idea of Jacksonian democracy, which eventually becomes, I would argue, the modern democratic movement. Not modern day. I'm not talking 2025. I'm saying like the guys, like I'm talking like the
20th century.
Like the actual modern period, which I think is like begins like the 1800s, like the contemporary period, whatever you want to call it. I know somebody's eventually going to start commenting like, oh yeah, no, it's the same. Like you keep saying Democrat. Like no, they're just not the same. They're not. And then you start to see some of the Democratic Republicans kind of fall more into this. This split's happening towards the end of Monroe's presidency, into what would become the Whig Party, and who was the most famous first Whig, or not first Whig, but one of the most famous Whigs is Abraham Lincoln. And the Whig Party would eventually develop into the Republican Party. The Republican Party was founded, in the 1850s in Wisconsin as an abolition party. Right, that's the reason we see the split in the Democratic Republican Party at the time, is over the role of the federal government. How powerful is the federal government? Monroe teeters that line. He believes in strong military spending, but and we'll talk about this, he has the 14 points that have to do with how and if Congress has a constitutional right to spend money. Now, the Whig Party is very, very much focuses on constitutional restraint, and which makes sense if you think the Whig Party occurred in the aftermath of the rise of Jacksonian democracy, Jacksonian Democrats. Jacksonian Democrats who believed in the concentration of power among the president, right? Don't forget, Jackson famously said to Marshall, the Trail of Tears, he famously said, Worcester versus Georgia, you come down here with your army and stop me, right? And we really see power concentrate in the presidency from Jackson all the way to Nixon. Mm-hmm. Now think of the Whigs, who get their name from the British, who are looking to the British Party that looks to constrain the monarch and put more focuses on the republic.
Right.
You can see how that starts to split. And where does Monroe fall in that? We really don't know, because Monroe both believes in the restraint of the president and actually turns to Congress with his 14 objections, instead of saying, no, I'm not doing it. So this is really the beginning of that split that would eventually become the two dominant parties in America for the last 170 years, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. But that hasn't happened yet. But these are the seeds planting it. So he gets into office. He's in office about 18 months. And we have what some define as the worst economic disaster ever in U.S. history at this point. There are some historians, some Cleometricists too. Cleometricists are economists who use history or study historical events through the lens of economics. Cleo is the Greek or Roman god, I think Greek god of history, whatever.
It's also my co-host on Humanity of Trading.
Really? It's called Cleo?
That's her name, yeah.
That's fantastic. Also, good plug.
Right?
And where is that available, Kyle?
All the places you get your podcast. I don't know. Buck starts here? No, wait. Try to shop for it. BandofTradersPodcast.com. That's the one. It's one of those. I don't know. Somewhere in there.
Google it. That is a good show, by the way, for everybody. I did not. I like to throw them on sometimes when I like doing chores and stuff around the house. Yeah. Kyle, I do listen to you outside of here.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
I don't want you to feel. I know that sounds creepier than it came out, but I do.
Right.
So this Panic of 1819, there's some Cleometrists actually call this the first. And God, I hope only, I think, I know, you can definitely argue the Great Depression. Economic collapse. Not a recession, not a panic, a collapse.
What makes this is worse than the Mississippi land deal thing? This is, or is we not a country yet at that point? It doesn't
we weren't a country. Yeah, okay. When the Mississippi bubble popped. For some reason, I thought you were referring to, but when, I thought you were referring to, it didn't have to do with Mississippi, but when all the Georgia politicians sold land.
That's what I was trying to get to, and I think I said it wrong. Yeah.
Because that was still one of my favorite. Like, what the heck is that? Georgia, no, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to sell another state.
Stop selling your states.
That must be really funny with that, like, as somebody in Congress was reviewing this, like, what the heck? No! You're not allowed to sell it. Well, it doesn't say I can't do it in the Constitution.
Georgia keeps shrinking.
Yeah, exactly. That's so weird. But yeah, so this was a collapse. So now there's actually no formal definition between a depression and a recession. Most people call it a recession. Two consecutive quarters of declining GDP. Yeah, I do. Cards on the table as an economist, I accept that as a definition. So yeah, there's the panic. So a collapse. Usually we talk about economic collapse, and every economist will give you a different answer. And honestly, a lot of them they're probably going to be right. The way I've generally taught it, the way I've generally talked about it, is a collapse is not the car slowing down; it's the car breaking down. A collapse is something intrinsic in the system has completely and utterly failed.
Would you classify the crash of 1929 as that?
Yeah.
What actually broke there?
What do I think broke there, or what?
Well, hang on. Let's say that for when we get to that point in the time. But what do you think actually broke in this circumstance here? Like, what is the thing that actually set all this off in motion? I guess.
Yeah, what I think happened is mispricing of risk by the Second National Bank on Western lands. So that's probably my answer for 1929 too. When I'm going to sound really Austrian, so anybody listen to this, like, huge grain of salt. This is a guy who, I'm saying this as an Austrian, who loves econometrics, all right? So, like, you're getting a heterodoxical macroeconomic assessment from somebody who teaches microeconomics. So you should immediately disregard what I'm saying and don't bring it up against, an actual economist. They'll probably rip me apart. We know where trade's occurring for things that are being traded. I think we can all admit that, right? I don't think that's an outlandish statement, that if things are being exchanged, we know things are being exchanged, right? That's a very 1=1 scenario. Now, when you can be trading on something where all the factors that go into that price point are manipulated. I would argue that everything you buy, there's some mild manipulation to the price, and that's not a bad thing. It's just not fully internalizing all the externalities, right? That's why my students have to learn about externalities, right? It's not properly priced when you buy corn, or I should say corn because that comes from the U.S. If you want to buy some avocados, right, or bananas, let's say bananas, right, it's not properly priced that the U.S. Navy allows free navigation of the seas, right? That's not priced in. That banana isn't it's not pricing in like, oh, cool, there's a bunch of awesome dudes on a ship making sure this banana is free to travel wherever it needs to, right? It's not accounting for the emissions of burning bunker fuel to get there. The price is, but not the emissions. When you buy your iPhone, it's not properly offsetting the cobalt that's in there and the economic degradation, and more importantly, the human cost of that.
This goes back to the South Dakota argument you made in episode 1 of this. Yeah,
kind of right on. So that proper pricing isn't there. Now, how tolerable is that? How sensitive or insensitive is that pricing when used to economic factors? So if you're not pricing something properly, that means you're not expressing and you never can. I'm not saying this isn't a critique of anybody who does pricing, but if you aren't pricing everything properly, you're not there can be economic situations that occur, and if that price is so far off, if the price from when things are being traded and its actual price adjusted for all the marginal social costs become really, really far apart, eventually it snaps. Now, a recession, I would argue, is the prices come really, really far apart, and they come back and contract back to where they're supposed to be. And that decline is what the recession is. A collapse, I would argue, is that it breaks. And you'd have a global reset, which is what happened in the Great Depression. I believe that's what happened here. So what happened is that this pricing was off, and it became so high off on over speculation that, and this is why I love this. This is why I'm an Austrian. I believe in true pricing, because this coincided. This over speculation in Western lands caused the second bank, the second bank, signed into law under Madison against Jefferson's recommendation, but really developed under Monroe, had to tighten its credit. Because you had all this over speculation in Western lands, you had a higher default rate. Kyle, you're a much better finance mind than me on the investment side too. If you have a higher rate of default, what happens to interest rates?
Yeah, they go up.
They go up.
The cost to borrow becomes more expensive if nobody's paying it back. Yeah,
exactly. At the same time, cotton prices collapsed.
Ooh, that's like having a bunch of money owed on mortgages and then home prices collapse.
Yep, and we're an export-driven economy at this point, especially in the South. So now there's not dollars coming in.
Right.
We're not trading it up north. It's dollars. The foreign dollars stop coming in their same value, so they can't service that debt. And that's why when we talk about a pricing correction causing a recession, right? That's one variable affecting one variable. But those two things happened, and the two dots got too far apart and broke. And that's a collapse. It resulted in mass unemployment, tons of foreclosures. Kyle, right on. You hit it right on the head. And it's a horrible economic downturn. Monroe did not propose any aggressive federal intervention, which, as somebody who was in the Jefferson administration, the Madison administration, is right on. But what happened is it fueled a lot of public distrust in banks and the federal government, and it really spurred forward, ironically, the Jacksonian movement that would come to kill the Second National Bank under Nicholas Biddle. The recession lasted, depression, correction, whatever you want to call it. It didn't last that long, to be honest with you. It was.
Do you think it would have lasted longer if he had tried to intervene? Because you look at what happened in 1929. That took World War II basically before we lift ourselves out of that depression.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say, right? It's hard to argue the negative on it. It depends on what the intervention is. I always say, I'm not one of those guys where all government intervention is bad and all government intervention is good. I think a lot of the stuff FDR did, and we'll talk about it when we get to him, I wasn't a fan of. AAA I wasn't a fan of at all. That was a bad idea. Anytime you have starving people and your policy makes farmers pour milk down the drain, you'd be like, am I the bad guy?
Yeah, that's...
And I would argue, I know, there's many people who would argue, it's not a surprise coming from somebody like me, but I'm like, no, World War II.
You're going to throw the cheese away. I mean, why not just turn it into cheese and stockpile it?
Oh, don't worry, we did that. What if we keep subsidizing it because World War II's over?
Right.
Subsidies and Parkinson's syndrome, right, dude? The more government pays for something, the harder it is for government not to pay for something the next year.
Yeah, right.
So this goes on for a couple of years, fairly early for most of his first administration, but it's quite quick corrections on it. It's important to note that this affected the North, but didn't strongly affect the North. And the North at this time was the industrial hub of the United States. Manufacturing is always going to be agrarian economics, right? That's the Lewis model. They won Nobel Prize for a reason. The manufacturing sector was just growing so strong, and it was also an area of the country that had the proper geography in a lot of cases, the proper education, and the right people at the right time to continue that innovation. So we didn't see a slowdown in that area, and that eventually, even to this day, when I was reading this, obviously Panic of 1819 is more of a economic thing than it is a historical thing. There's a lot of people point at that as why the Northeast is to this day the most dominant financial area of the entire United States. It is.
I just point to Boston's harbor. Shipping is that's why. It's because you have good ports.
That's not a bad one at all. That was really look at this deep water. So we were after the war, after the Panic of 1819, the next year we have the Missouri Compromise. And the Missouri Compromise is what admitted Maine and Louisiana. Damn, listen to me. Maine and Missouri.
Yeah, that's because we needed a North and a South state in order to balance out the slave states, the free states.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a congressman called James Talmadge, and he was from New York. He introduced the amendment, and it was to prohibit further introduction of slavery into Missouri and mandate gradual emancipation. The impact, actually caused a huge firestorm in Congress. It was widely reported in partisan papers as a moral crisis and constitutional debate. Southern editors denounced it as an existential threat to the Union. Yeah, I know, right? A moral crisis and you own slaves. That's insane. Well, exactly. Well, Northern editors hailed it as the first real stand against the spread of slavery. And, when we talk about the Missouri Compromise, one of the things I think is very funny is it's seen as it's seen as a compromise. It really wasn't a compromise. They got what they wanted. They got slavery in Missouri, but it in my opinion, it did really, and I should say my opinion, but from a lot of if you read through the historical records on this, what it really did was draw the battle lines of the Civil War. Ironically, because Missouri fought on the side of the Union, for the record, which is
it drew
weird.
that, and it also split Massachusetts up, right? Because that's what caused you to lose Maine, right?
We lost Maine.
Yeah.
R.I.P. But yeah, so we end up with this Missouri. Some people call it Missouri Crisis, the Missouri Compromise. I did think it was very funny that the South was referring to it as Missouri Crisis, and everybody else called it Missouri Compromise. It's kind of like the War of Northern Aggression.
Right.
Yeah, and this is the first time, by the way, Kyle, we see codified as sort of like a unifying platform, I guess you could call it, the idea of states' rights when it comes to slavery. So I thought it was kind of cool. That you can actually see a moment in history and something switches. So Missouri
It's
enters
just sad that that's the thing that we decided to take the stand on. This is
Yeah,
what states need to protect.
right. Missouri enters as a slave state, Maine as a free state, and slavery is banned north of the 3630 parallel in Louisiana Territory. And this is the moment we will talk about for the next 45 years of this podcast in American history.
The next 11 presidents?
Yeah, pretty much. The next 11 terms. This just never goes away. It was not a solution to a problem. If anything, it revealed the sectional divides and the sectional divisions. And most interesting to me, I believe that showed that that slavery, when it comes to the southern states, was not a given, in quotation marks, right of slave owners anymore. And that caused the rabid animal effect, where they became more and more and more and more aggressive. And I think it shocked, if you read some of the newspapers, I think it shocked them, the fact that Monroe signed this. I think it shocked a lot of people, and that Monroe endorsed this and allowed for it. And this is the complexity of Monroe. It's the complexity of all the founding fathers who owned slaves. That this is just fascinating. The whole Missouri Compromise is fascinating to me, because it effectively, literally drew a line in the sand.
Was this his first or second term?
This is his first term.
Wow, and he still got reelected.
Oh, very popularly got reelected. Nobody really ran against him, to be honest with you.
Okay. Just surprising that you think that you'd jeopardize something that important to half of the nation, that you might jeopardize your chances at reelection. I mean, John Adams couldn't get reelected.
Yeah. The Sedition Act did not help him on that. Monroe also acquired a territory that eventually became a U.S. state.
Which state was this?
Florida.
Oh, I do remember that.
So
yeah,
Monroe is why we have Florida, man.
That was the finishing off of the Louisiana Purchase, right?
Yeah.
Because we just got the French out of there, and now the Spains, they got the last little... But they had Florida and a bunch of stuff in like Mexico and south of that, right?
Yeah.
South America?
Yeah. Don't worry. We also have that. We have that to come up with. 'Cause, again, Monroe is this big external president. He really did focus on an international agenda. And, this is where
Florida cost us.
I got to see. So I don't... There was a...
I'll look that up while you keep talking.
All right. So we had the acquisition of Florida, and that was on the Adams-Onis Treaty. Adams, as in John Quincy Adams, who helped negotiate on behalf of the United States. And what happened is Spain was weakening very much over this time period. This is in 1821. It was ratified in 1821. It first started getting discussed formally in 1819. Is that this would eventually become the background for this decaying Spanish Empire became the background for the Monroe Doctrine.
Right. Okay, so in 1810, parts of West Florida were annexed by the proclamation of James Madison, who claimed the region as part of the Louisiana Purchase. Those parts were incorporated in the newly formed territory of Orleans. Then the U.S. annexed the Mobile District of West Florida to the Mississippi Territory in 1812. Spain continued to dispute the area. The United States gradually increased the area it occupied. So it sounds like we just kept taking it and saying, like, what are you going to do?
Yeah, it was a little awkward because remember the Louisiana Territory, though owned by the French, was administered by the Spaniards.
Right, and the Spaniards were pissed that they didn't get a chance to come back and
buy
it. Supposed to get like right of first refusal, right?
Yes, and Napoleon's like, psych!
It's like, well, there you go. 15 million on the table. I'll take it right now.
Yeah. I'm going to go beat up some Brits. Right. So in fairness, I don't think it was like us being, I think we were just like, no, we bought this. This is ours. No, actually, Kyle, you're right. You phrased that correctly. Never mind.
We kind of just took it.
I think we just took it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we bought it, but it's like we didn't. The people who sold it us didn't own it.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah. So this was. Yeah, actually, it's funny. So Florida at this time had become a safe haven for escaped slaves and a lot of Seminole resistance. Now, this is run by the Spanish Crown at this point. The Spanish Crown at this point is very Catholic, and so slavery was outlawed and for any Catholic monarch. It couldn't be done. I'm sure you can find a million violations of that. I'm just saying that's broadly how that is framed.
Yeah. They put out rules, but not everybody follows them. Just like every other rule.
Yeah, like every puts out. Any organization puts out, I would say. But and this really did help solidify Monroe's image as this like strong nationalistic president. There was some controversy around here because there's something called the Seminole Wars, and that Andrew Jackson during this point decided to take like a bunch of troops and go into Florida and start fighting people. Like nobody told him it was okay to do that.
It sounds like Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, he just went in there and was like,
kind of like a Julius Caesar. Like I'm gonna go conquer the Gauls.
Yeah, pretty much. Except this was just like him beating up some Native Americans for like no reason. He was like, "Oh, the Seminoles are launching raids into here," and his like solution to that was just go like attack a bunch of like Seminole villages, and that's like not how war works. That's not like it's like you're not defeating the people who were attacking you. You seem to be attacking civilians.
Andrew Jackson was not a good man, was he?
No, not a good man. Absolutely horrible human being. And yes, no, just a piece of like everybody's old Hickory. I'm like, yeah, no, horrible person, just horrible person.
Just think of your racist grandpa.
But like
spending time with. Yeah,
but also he has like powers of the executive branch.
Sounds way too familiar.
So after that, the next, you have his next major issue, which is the African colonization, the founding of Liberia. So as I talked earlier, we'll just kind of gloss over it since we already talked about it pretty heavily in the first episode. But the American Colonization Society, which could you imagine starting a society today called the American Colonization Society?
No.
No. They established Liberia, and I probably mentioned this in episode 1, but I want to read. I put it in bold in my notes, so maybe I didn't mention it. The free black community in North America did not want to go there. It was horribly unpopular.
Nobody wants to go there.
Nobody wants to go there.
None of them are from there. Yeah,
and the free black community of the United States, and a lot of times you'll hear that, like, you actually sometimes see it written as FBC, but for the free black community, is a terminology that's fairly commonly used. I think it's coming back into vogue, but it was very popularly used, like in pre-World War II writing I saw. But just to, because it sounds like a weird term. It is a like academic term. They were asserting that they were Americans by birth, and there's a lot of like northern newspapers that weren't even abolition newspapers, but like in the northern part of the country that were like. Love that.
Actually, yeah, that's a good argument. That's a great argument.
That's a great argument. They're just like, you are, like we're Americans.
Yeah. At this point, I'd say they are. I mean, that was the point I made when you first mentioned this crazy Liberia scheme.
So that's like, one of the, and that happened towards the end of his presidency. This idea of, Monrovia being formed, Liberia being formed, but then we go into the ones that you alluded to earlier, Kyle. So we have one of the different bills, and he basically we could talk about that. That's probably a good closing note because it's going to give us it's a good dialogue on really how Monroe thought. But I got to talk. We got to talk about the tariffs, man.
Yes, please.
So there was 3 series of tariffs that were passed in the course of 8 years. One of them was passed at the end of Madison's administration. But there's the tariffs of 1820, the tariffs of 1824 that were both passed under Monroe.
Are these all in response to the recession or the collapse of 1819, or is this one of them looks like it was kind of related because it was a year after?
Yeah. So there was this thought. Not thought. They were passed in response to cheap manufactured British goods. It's really what they were passed on, and that was meant to like protect the manufacturing base that was in the north, and obviously as you have the panic induced, the panic setting in and the kind of collapse, the area that is still having economic growth because of industrialization is the north. So it's kind of like, oh, this is a golden child. We gotta make sure he's okay. Mm-hmm. I have a collection of some headlines, if that's okay.
I'd love it. Okay, yeah.
I feel like as the show matures, there's more fun things I'm learning to do as I like the headlines.
Yeah, it's kind of how podcasting works.
Yeah.
You go back and watch the first episodes you ever did. They're trash.
Not yours, but definitely mine.
No, all mine are garbage. Everything that was like 2 months ago, I can't listen to.
Yeah, yeah. We like one of them was financial panic grows out west. There was the Missouri. This one's from the South. The Missouri crisis threatens Union.
Did you ever play a game called Railway Tycoon?
Yes.
Okay, Sid Meier's like the OG one, like
yeah.
That
and Sid Meier's Pirates.
Sid Meier's Pirates is good.
Literally one of the best games ever.
The headlines from Sid, I've been playing through it actually recently because I just got an emulator to go play like the old DOS games. Man, the headlines on that are fascinating to read, and I think there is actually one of those that I think I've seen that Panic Sets In. What was it? Say it again.
Oh, Panic Sets In the West.
Yeah, I think I've seen that headline. Like the newspaper pops up on the screen when that year hits and the stock prices collapse or railroads.
Yeah, it's so I mean, it's pandemonium when this happens.
Yeah,
and there was 8 classifications of tariffs. Eight different industries were hit with tariffs.
Okay.
So first we had textile and cotton goods. So woolen and cotton clothes from Britain flooded American markets like just after the War of 1812 and like wiped out U.S. manufacturing there. So tariffs were imposed both on finished cotton textiles and on woolen fabrics. So base material and finished material. And the purpose of that was to protect emerging textile mills in New England and in the mid-Atlantic states, especially in Massachusetts and Pennsylvania. So like Lowell, Massachusetts, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But then this is where it gets wild. Iron and iron products on both. So that they tariffed both raw iron and finished products. So nails, bars, rods, castings, any type of hardware. It actually stunted railroad growth in the United States because of it. And this was pushed very heavily by Pennsylvania and New Jersey, because they wanted to be able to compete with the cheaper but higher quality made British iron. At this time, Britain is making some high quality stuff. Glassware. So in both window and tableware, as well as mirrors. Mirrors became obscenely expensive. And the rationale given behind this tariff was they wanted the U.S. to start manufacturing those things. So there was no replacement. That's why everything became wicked expensive.
Sounds like semiconductors.
Right. Hemp was one of them.
Okay.
And they called this is part of a part of the tariffs called hemp and cordage. Because hemp's used for other things, but including
it's
ropes.
big in the sailors. Sailors love that for ropes and
Yes, yeah, dude. So exactly, it was ropes, rigging, sails, and twine were the biggest hit ones. Kentucky advocated very heavily for this, but Kyle, let me hit you with something. I did not know this until I started research. So it's funny when I got the list when I was doing my research, I got the list of all tariffs, and I saw hemp and cordage, and in my head I'm thinking, I'm like, I don't think England grows hemp. And I'm like,
oh, that's a good point.
Guess what 2 countries are importing all the hemp into the United States? One's Britain. One's associated with Britain at this time.
It's probably I guess it would be one of their colonies.
Yep.
So Barbados, like one of those, maybe.
So that's what I thought too. Yeah. And I went and looked up. You can grow hemp in Barbados, but they were still had a bunch of they were still like sugarcane and indigo was still around.
Maybe one of those other ones down there, like Dominican or.
It was what Christopher Columbus was looking for. Is India was producing an insane amount of hemp in Russia.
What?
Yeah,
okay, that's not what I would have picked.
I would not have picked those either.
I would have thought that would have been a U.S. thing. I thought hemp was specifically a U.S. product.
Yeah, it was grown very heavily in Kentucky. There's like a hemp belt from like Kentucky all the way to kind of the coastal area of Virginia.
Oh,
I believe
wild.
George Washington grew hemp also. But yeah, Russia. I was very surprised with it. Then I looked into it. There's some Russian holdings in the Black Sea area and stuff like that. That was actually kind of a good climate for what it looked like. That was a rabbit hole, by the way.
Everyone forgets how big Russia is.
Yeah, right, dude.
Russia spans a lot of different types of land.
Yeah, and then we also had sugar and molasses that was imported from the West Indies. And, especially molasses. And that was done to protect sugarcane operations that had just started coming up online in Louisiana. A lot of the themes of these tariffs is they're protecting industries that haven't developed yet. So you're going to see huge price spikes.
Yeah, because there's no finished product to
Yeah.
You've incentivized them to finish building the factories, but it still takes a year or two for these things to get up and running.
Oh yeah, and then there's sugar tariffs too, which wiped out the American, not wiped out, but severely hurt the American rum industry. Lead and lead products. Oh, I'm not even done. Lead and lead products. And really, what happens is that Missouri and Illinois had lead mines that were going on in this time.
Yeah,
and so they really protect them. So this is really cool, Kyle. So obviously, bullets and piping were the two things I was thinking of. Roofing. It made roofing insanely. I was like, oh yeah. They used lead roofs. Were a big thing.
What? Wait.
Yeah. Like lead is like commonly used for different parts of like when you're building a roof.
I didn't know that at all.
Yeah, so it was really cool.
Housing expenses, clothing. It sounds like everything's going up.
Oh, everything's going up. Hat making and other finished goods like that, like the haberdashery. So hats, gloves, boots, and leather goods. And
is that what haberdashery means?
That's what haberdashery is. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
You like that? Yeah.
Okay.
I can't wait for somebody to be like, I pronounced that horribly wrong. It's actually habash.
No, you nailed it actually.
So, this is the worst one to me of all. This one, as an economist, ticked me off, is because the goal of this was to encourage. This is like I'm like synthesizing this from a couple different sources, but they all kind of said the same thing. The goal was to encourage full cycle domestic manufacturing. So they didn't even have any idea. Nobody wanted to do this. There's nobody sitting around being like, I need the Europeans are flooding out the hats and gloves and boots market. No, the U.S. government was like, hey, no, we ban it. Somebody will just make something. I both love the faith in the free market, simultaneously them clearly hating the free market.
We love our free market. We don't love their free market.
You're doing it wrong. So, yeah, and obviously their goal is to encourage that.
Well, we made a lot of hats out of beavers, right? Or was that before?
Yeah, that was before the French did a lot of that.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sure
is that what stimulated the beaver hat trade? Is that how we got it going? Monroe's long-sighted plans to stimulate haberdashery development in the U.S.?
Also, how important is haberdashery to your economy?
Apparently very.
Oh, and the last one. I saved this one for last because the irony of this is amazing.
The iron. You already said iron. Dun, dun, dun. Hang on a minute. I got a sound effect for that one.
You have sound effects?
I do. I had to hit the live button. That was the wrong one.
I like that one.
There it is.
Oh my god. I have sound effects.
Yeah.
But the last one was paper goods, papers and books, stationery, writing paper, printed materials. They put a tax on paper, which is like not the last thing you do in the United States. And
what was the reasoning for that one?
They were trying to protect domestic publishers and printers who were complaining. Ironically, they were complaining about the high price of paper, and they were
they thought that tariffing it would make it better.
Yes. This is now. In fairness, this is 100 years before macroeconomics was formed, but still an insane position to take.
Yeah. Well, to do it. So was this all like the first set that went out in 1920, or is this over the course of the entire?
This is over the course of the entire time, and there is mix and matching as you go along. So
he's doing it again, is what I'm saying. It's not like he's had 4 years to see what the effects of his tariffs are, and he's still putting more on. We need more of these. Actually, I think the problem is he didn't go far enough.
Exactly. It's like why people keep arguing about communism. It's not that communism is bad. We just haven't done enough communism.
Well, yeah, you just haven't figured out how to do it without the corruption.
Yeah, and the genocide.
Yeah,
that just follows around that form of government.
Well, you have to get rid of all the smart people who know better.
No. If your government only works because you get rid of everybody else who has a better idea, then you don't have a good form of government.
That's how you end up not knowing who built the pyramids.
Yes, exactly. The Northeast, this is great for them. Booms their economy. The South, who opposes it, they're like, there's going to be, they send a lot of exports out, and some having retaliatory, and they were right. There was retaliatory tariffs on cotton.
It's funny, they were against it though. The South was against. Like some of those tariffs were protect them, weren't they? Like for the cotton industry.
Yes, but the people buying the cotton, which the Brits would buy a lot. It wasn't uncommon for them to buy raw cotton, make it into textiles, and then send it back to be sold.
Right.
And so now they got retaliatory tariffs in Britain, and then and now they can only sell to one. There's only one buyer, so there's a monopsony, and it's the places up north that are buying the cotton for cheaper. I often think the North is like, don't have slaves. That's your fault. Yeah. Industrialize.
Move
and
on.
out west, and it kind of shrug their shoulders.
Dude, the more I read about the out west, the more it looks to me like that was where all the anarchists went.
Yes.
If you went out west, just because you didn't want the government involved in anything to do with your life, you wanted to be able to shoot a guy because he looked at you wrong or because you wanted his stuff.
That's why it's funny when Aaron Burr went out there to try and start like a civil war, and like everybody's like, "What are you talking about? I don't want to be involved in any of this." And he's like, "Oh." Nice. And what we'll eventually see is all these tariffs lead to. He did sign it. He wasn't a fan of it, but he signed it but he was nervous of the social tensions. But the South would later refer to these as the tariffs of abomination, and we'll cover this during Mr. Adams. Is there something called a nullification crisis? I'm sorry, not Mr. Adams, Mr. Jackson. There would be the nullification crisis, which are states trying to say they can just ignore parts of the Constitution that they don't like.
Huh. Interesting. How'd that work out?
Horribly. It was really, really, really bad.
Spoiler.
Spoiler. The North won.
Yeah.
Pretty emphatically too. Like it was no compromise. We won.
They
very heavily
salted the fields.
Yes, there are literal areas of the entire country. There's areas of the United States that have not economically recovered from the Civil War. You can still see it like suppressed in their GDP.
Wow.
And
you said you can still see the effects of that Georgia deal too, right?
Yeah. You can like.
So is that place like double hit?
Oh no, there's areas of Georgia right along, like the Florida. Am I saying that right? Like Florida Georgia line.
Okay.
That are still like permanently economically depressed.
Like the southern shoreline along the Gulf. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like really bad. And, at the end of the day, it's never going to recover, and maybe it's not meant to recover. Like, the investment would be so high for those areas to catch up to the rest of the world that it's honestly probably better you probably use a better return on your capital to just maintain the status quo of investment and then wait until there's bleed over effects into those counties or census tracts, I should say. I got a little economically opinionated, but I mean it's just they're so far behind now that there's just not going to be a return to any sort of catch up.
Better off giving it back to Spain and
Spain. This is your problem now.
Spain, this is closer to you GDP wise than the rest of our country. You can have it back. What'd you say? Spain would be like the 40% poorer,
and 40% lower than Mississippi, which is the poorest state. So the last major thing, the last major thing to talk about is infrastructure during his administration. He vetoed the bonus bill, which we had talked about a little bit.
Monroe, I was digging you until you started effing with my infrastructure, man. That's my thing.
Yeah, so that was proposed by Calhoun. He vetoed the bill on March 3rd, 1817. Madison was also against it, to be honest with you. And it was the last day, his last day as president-elect and first day in office. He did that. Monroe, cool thing. So Monroe also hosted the first White House wedding for his daughter. And his older daughter ran the guest list.
Okay.
And she ticked off a bunch of people that she left off the list. And she was known to be petty. That's how she was. The modern term, but she was known to be very petty.
I love that.
And so people think it was like on purpose. And Monroe also had a very quiet. He had the first presidential inauguration inside the Capitol. I think there was a snowstorm going on. There was a storm going on. So he just inside the Capitol. It wasn't that big of an affair.
Was this first or second term?
The first term.
Was the White House there?
Capitol building. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I read that wrong. I heard that wrong.
the marriage was, I believe, like around 1820, maybe a little later. And that was in the
That was an
House.
outdoor one, right?
Is it outdoor if the roof got burnt off the building? So he vetoes the bonus bill, and that was because he believed the Constitution did not explicitly authorize federal government to fund improvements. He supported the goal too, but he wanted a constitutional amendment was needed to do that power, which is kind of funny.
Oh, that's actually, I do kind of like that then. Okay.
He was a strict
Yeah,
constitutionalist.
he wanted something to spell out what he was allowed to do. All right.
He did very strongly support a stronger military, but he wanted it limited in its ability to influence U.S. politics and actually operate in general in the United States. Remember, this is before a lot of the laws said they can't do that.
Right.
So the U.S. Navy was expanded. Specifically, he expanded it in the Caribbean and actually in the Mediterranean. He did a lot of cool stuff with the Navy in the Mediterranean, really established that presence. People think us being in the Mediterranean is something that happened after World War II. It's like, we've been in the Mediterranean since the 1700s.
Yeah, there's a lot of trade that happens out there.
Yeah, dude, 100% right. He also reorganized the Army and opened new military academies and programs, which I thought was really cool. He did, he's always contradicts himself. He did caution about authorizing large peacetime appropriations for Congress. I'm sorry, for the military without clear congressional approval. So not just, hey, Congress says you can spend this amount of money, but actually saying Congress needs to approve what the money's for. Mm-hmm. He did sign the General Survey Act, which, as an economist, I thought was the coolest thing in the world.
Is that the one that allowed like all the mineral surveys?
It did like mining surveys, but it also did all the roads and canals in the United States.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so he just gave it out freely to different states. Right. He was a very strong believer that states had the supreme authority for infrastructure.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Like, last thing you want is a one-size-fits-all approach for a country as vast as the United States is.
Yeah, right.
I mean, really, you look at it like the United States is kind of like Europe, but every state is a country. Like, that's really kind of the model we were going for, right?
Yes, exactly. I would say people think federal government and national government are synonyms, and they're not. No. Like, federal is a style of government. There's a couple different bills he vetoed at different points. One was the Cumberland Road bill. Which was basically this massive road they were trying to build, and he had doubts of the constitutionality of it, but he did approve other funding that indirectly supported it. But he kept his same line over and over again. You see, it's Constitution, Constitution, Constitution.
It's kind of hard to go wrong if you're only doing everything that says it's just specifically spelled out in your job description.
I think he was like, I got shot over this document. We're following it, damn it.
Right?
But this all culminates to something called the 14 points that he authors and sends to Congress. I think it's cool that he authored something and gave it to Congress. I'm going to outline my thoughts.
It's just really, you couldn't drill it down to like a little bit fewer than 14.
14 seems a lot.
14 seems a bit much.
So this is, Kyle, it gets way crazy on that. So he examines 14 potential constitutional clauses or sources of implied power. He did not like implied power that might justify federal funding of internal improvements. And he explained why each one of these failed the test. Mm-hmm. In other words, why each of
these are all the justifications I could use to fund this thing, but here's why I can't.
Here's why I can't. One of them was Congress. We'll run through them. Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes. He was like, just because you collect taxes doesn't mean you have the right to spend them.
Right.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm one of those guys. Like, if the government's taking money from me, it better be spending it on stuff. Like, I don't want the government just taking money from me. That's crazy.
Right.
The power to pay debt and provide common defense and general welfare. He did say this was probably the best rationale, but he interpreted very narrow, saying it did not authorize spending for internal improvements unless they were very clearly tied to defense. I would argue our highways are the best defense we have. I think Eisenhower would say that.
Yeah, any infrastructure is national defense. It's got to be.
Yeah. I like the idea of Eisenhower and Monroe, and having an Eisenhower is like, I was a better general than you. I didn't get shot. And I had better views on road.
I knew how to take cover.
Yeah, right. There's the power to regulate commerce. In Monroe, basically, we can regulate it, but this we have to build it. A congressman who I could not find what congressman proposes. It just kept saying congressman. Said the power to declare war means you can justify infrastructure spending. And he responded quite funny when he's just like, the idea that war could justify peacetime infrastructure is loose at best.
Yes.
And he sounds like a judge. It's kind of funny. He sounds very judgy right now. Like, I like it. The power to raise and support armies, the power to maintain a navy. He said, well, you can build army barracks, you can build naval ports, but that doesn't mean you can build highways.
That doesn't mean you can't build you can't build roads to connect your bases.
Exactly.
Or even if you could, that still doesn't let you build all the other stuff that the cities need.
This one's cool. So his 7th point was the power to suppress insurrection and repel invasion. Mm-hmm. He agreed with this in practice. He was very much agreed with this, but he said it was too contingent on a specific crisis and not broad enough to justify a permanent infrastructure. He had this worry that people would use crises to justify monumental changes in government.
Yeah, he's not wrong.
Which he's just been 100% right about since he said that.
Yes.
The power to make all laws necessary and proper, that's called the elastic clause. That's like Congress reserves that right. But this is really interesting. So this is where he becomes more, and he served in Congress, so I don't want this to sound like he's oppositional to Congress, where he's basically, long story short, he goes, yeah, no, I agree with that, but that's so, I mean, then everything, why do we even have discussions? If the answer is Congress do whatever it wants because it can do whatever it wants, well, then you don't have a Congress. You just you have an oligarchy, and so he didn't like the idea of that opening the door. Though he completely acknowledges that the founding fathers, which is ironic because it's him, but he didn't write the Constitution, right? Like he was, but he was like, I often wonder what he did.
See, I think he's trying to fix those things. I think that's what he's trying to. He's looking at we've had 5 presidents. I'm the 5th one, or he's the 5th one, right? That have gone through this experiment and seen where some of the shortfalls of this document are and where some of the potential, issues in the future could come up. And he's trying to fix those.
Yeah, and I like the idea that he's pushing it back on Congress. Like, make an amendment. He's like, I'm not against this. Right. He just wants it defined. Slope.
He wants it defined.
Yeah, and he's scared of the slippery slope of the executive branch, which is ironic because he's one president away from in Jackson of somebody who's like, I'll do whatever I want.
Right.
And so he also writes how somebody countered with, well, you can build post offices, and he actually, this is why I like Monroe. He's like, that does justify. You are right. The construction maintenance of post roads totally is
just post office though. How about schools? What about everything else that you want to put in?
Yep. So he goes post office roads, but those roads can't implicitly built for general commerce or travel. But he admits when they're good points. I think that's good.
But that's a workaround is what his point is. It's like, why do I want a workaround? I want something that lets me actually do the thing that I want to do, and I want everyone to be on board with it.
Yeah, and I like that. Like,
I do too. That's consensus building is what that is.
Power to make treaties was another one.
Yeah. Because
people argued that if some treaties involved infrastructure, specifically with some of the native nations. But Monroe said those treaties don't inherently authorize domestic spending, but if they're part of a treaty, then yes. But he's like, it doesn't, just because you agree to build a canal for a Native American tribe or something like that doesn't implicitly mean I can build a road in New York. Those are two different things.
Right. So you saying that anytime I want to build a road in Delaware, I got to go get the British to agree to some deal?
Yeah, right. In West Virginia, they wanted to build a bridge during the Cold War, and the U.S. government wouldn't fund it, so they went to Moscow. Now I'm gonna hit you with a crazy one. His 11th point that he disputed was the power to dispose of and make rules for U.S. territories. Monroe argued he could build a road in a territory, but territories aren't states, and therefore it needs to be an amendment. Mm-hmm. He believed in state rights, not in the way that you hear people in the 1840s and in today talk about state rights. He believed in them as states, like you said, Kyle, earlier. It's almost like how Europe is. It's almost like it's a mini sovereign nation,
right?
That we just decide not to attack or tariff each other.
Right. We have free trade agreements, basically. And a mutual defense agreement.
Exactly. So here's where we get to our most interesting one, which is something called the compact power, which is something that was heavily debated in the founding of the United States, but actually something that has relatively faded from history. So the federal government can enter into compacts with states over anything it wants to. Mm-hmm. And he examined whether the federal government could enter into compacts with states to build infrastructure. He agreed with the constitutionality of it, but emphasized it required state consent and cooperation and could not be a unilateral federal action.
So you need the state to ask for it first before you can do it. You can't go in there and dictate you're building a school here.
Yeah, exactly. He also...
I don't mind that either, but you still need some way of like distributing everything equitably amongst all the states.
And what's funny is that in every state in America, that's how it works between their municipality and the state itself. So in Massachusetts, we have a program called Chapter 90, and basically the state gives us funding for approved grants or for approved projects that are city-owned streets. That's how it works in many countries, in many states. So it's actually very common logic there. There's another one: power to admit new states and govern territories. That was an argument made. He was like, that has nothing to do with the discussion. And then the last point he argued against was somebody, one of the common, I keep saying somebody, when I say somebody, I'm just being nomenclature for there was an argument out there.
Yeah.
The power to guarantee a Republican form of government. He was like, what the hell does that have to do with anything? He goes, you have a guarantee what he wrote is you have a political guarantee, but not an economic guarantee. And I kind of like that. Now, how did other presidents interpret his 14 plans? Because you know what's funny? A lot of people who even disagreed with Monroe afterwards were like, yeah, I get his point. Like, what a crazy thing. A president outlined his rationale to Congress and the American people and was like, here's what I'm thinking.
Right.
Well, is anybody saying here I'm thinking wrong, or do you just not like what my opinion is? Because those are two different things.
Right.
Also, they kept electing him as a strict constitutionalist, so that's like their
that's
fault.
kind of his thing. He kind of has to do that. Yeah.
So, so to close this out, Andrew Jackson is just like, yeah, I don't give a crap. He immediately throws all this away. Basically, he makes a spectacle of this. And what's really funny is that as he's kind of making, he again, Jackson early in his presidency, kind of is a strict constitutionalist. And so he vetoed something called the Mayville Road Bill, which would have funded a road entirely within Kentucky. He ends up vetoing this, but, he later changes, and he's like, it could be federally supported if there's a national interest. But he slowly starts just, never mind, I don't need this. James K. Polk comes in, so that's in the 1840s, late 1840s, and starts building, he's like, do you want manifest destiny? We need some roads. We need some roads for this manifest destiny. Abraham Lincoln finally completely reverses it, and he signs into law the Pacific Railroad Act, the Morrill Land Grant, which makes universities, actually the one time I'm not wearing a WVU shirt is the one time we get land grants.
I meant to give you crap about that.
Yeah,
I just told the dean of West Virginia University that you always wear your West Virginia shirt when we record.
And then Lincoln goes even further. He starts doing banking acts. Roosevelt says Theodore Roosevelt's like, this whole thing's stupid. He goes on the record rejecting Monroe's 14 plans and builds the Panama Canal. And then FDR's like, yo, my cousin and my wife's
my cousin brother,
my cousin brother, because Theodore Roosevelt married his cousin, and not Theodore. FDR married his cousin, and we don't talk about that at all. No, we don't. He's like, yo, bro, hold my bear, bro, but colloquially and literally, he's like, hold my bear, and you have the TVA, the PWA, the CCC, the Federal Highway Program, so this is tossed out the window. I mean, and right now, the largest building infrastructure in the United States is
the National Highway Act, wasn't it?
Yeah, National Highway, all the through Eisenhower. But, I mean, at the end of the day, Monroe's entire time of presidency was this, this outward expansion. He recognizes Grand Colombia, which is, Grand Colombia, Argentina, Chile. He represents all these countries. We'll talk a little bit more of that during the Monroe Doctrine episode. But he's a successful president, too. He didn't do the Panic of 1819. That wasn't his fault. That was a massive war and bad policies under Madison and Jefferson, who were great, who had some good ideas, some bad ideas, but knew nothing about the economy. Just literally did the opposite of what we know about economic growth. But throughout this entire time, throughout Monroe's presidency, he managed to keep an incredibly talented and smart staff there, which is why a lot of his policies are very well written. He stabilized borders. He solidified the entire East Coast of the United States, and somehow managed to balance being liked by Britain and liked by the French to the point where like there were streets named after him in France, and the Brits were happy to come together to do the Monroe Doctrine, which again we'll get into. But overall, as we kind of close out Monroe's presidency, like he's a strict constitutionalist. He's a man who was happy to be disagreed with, which is why he had incredibly intelligent, aggressive people in his cabinet.
He peed off the entire South by doing the Missouri Compromise, and yet still got elected to another term.
Kyle, what we hope to do when we talk about, and when we get into this more and more presidents, I say become a little more obscure, is to kind of tell the story that Monroe is a successful president, who wasn't just one doctrine that was written by his Secretary of State, but he was actually a successful president who was stoic in many ways, but was also just a brilliant man who made a lot of great decisions, and I would argue built the foundation for a lot of modern systems we have in the United States.
I'd say his brilliance is less in like the intellectual variety and more in like the practicality of doing the actual job.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. But we are getting way long on here. At least I think I know we got about half hour's worth of stuff to cut out of this one. So we're going to have to stop you there so we can wrap this one up. Join us next week as we... what are we doing for part 4?
Monroe Doctrine?
That's right. Yes, we do have something for that. Okay. I was going to say you can email us suggestions at thebuckstartsherepodcast.com, but I think we've already got that one nailed out. So we'll be back next week to talk about Monroe Doctrine. On your way out, visit thebuckstartsherepodcast.com, sub on your favorite platforms to stay up to date with the show, and we will see you all next week. Produced by China Shop Productions.